In any field that's all about helping people grow, whether it's therapy, social work, or even coaching, there's always this one big question hanging in the air. How do we know if what we're doing is actually making a difference? Today, we're diving into how to measure the things that truly matter.
So how do we know if helping actually helps? It sounds like a simple question, right? But it's actually so much more complex. I mean, when you're dealing with something internal, like anxiety, or a really complicated family issue, how can you be sure that what you're doing is really working? That's the challenge we're going to tackle.
So, to get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the why. Why is measurement so critical in the first place? Then we'll get into how to set a starting point, explore the two main ways to track progress, using numbers and stories, and finally, we'll talk about picking the right tool for the job.
All right, first things first. Why even bother with all this measurement stuff? It's so easy to just write it off as, paperwork or bureaucracy. But it is so much more than that.
The thing is, measurement isn't just for one person. It really helps everyone involved. Sure, it holds people accountable to funders and agencies, but it also helps practitioners get better at their jobs by showing them what's working and what isn't. And maybe most importantly, it makes sure the work is both ethical and effective, because seeing real, visible progress, that's a huge motivator for a client.
And this quote, man, it just nails it. Evaluation isn't something that's done to a client, it's something that's done with them. When people can literally see their own progress, it is incredibly empowering. It builds momentum and turns the whole thing into a real partnership.
Okay, so if we're going to track progress, we obviously need a starting line, right? A point A. That's exactly where the idea of a baseline comes in. Think of a baseline as the before photo in a before and after shot. It's that snapshot you take of the problem before you start doing anything to fix it. This gives you a really clear, solid point of comparison, so later on, you can see exactly how far you've come.
Let's make this real with an example. Meet William. His goal is to attend school regularly, but his starting point, his baseline, is that his attendance is just inconsistent. By tracking this one thing, his social worker can see clear progress. Going from a vague inconsistent to a concrete 4 out of 5 days a week makes that progress feel totally real. It's something they can actually point to and celebrate.
This actually leads us perfectly into our first big approach to measurement, looking at progress by the numbers. This is the quantitative side of things.
Now, when we talk about measuring with numbers, it really boils down to two main things. First, there are the overt behaviors, stuff you can actually see and count, like how many times someone makes a positive statement. And second, you've got the internal states, those subjective feelings like anxiety or self-esteem, which we usually measure with some kind of rating scale.
So how do you measure an internal feeling?
Well, here's a great example. A self-anchored scale. What's cool about this is that you work with the client to define what each number means to them. So a 1 might be totally relaxed, and a 7 is the absolute worst anxiety they can imagine. This is how you turn a subjective feeling into a piece of data you can actually work with.
And this is where the magic happens. When you track that number over time, you get a chart just like this one. You can literally see the progress. The client started with anxiety way up there to 6.5. A couple weeks in, it's down to a 5. By week 4, it's at a 3.5. That's a huge deal. It takes a feeling and makes the change visible.
But, numbers don't tell the whole story, do they? Of course not. That's where the other half of this comes in, the qualitative approach, which is all about the story behind the data.
This is all about getting to the meaning behind those numbers. It's about the client's own story, their personal experience, and all the context around what's happening. It's the narrative that really brings those data points to life.
Yeah, I just love this quote. It says, qualitative evaluation adds the humanity to the statistical data. It's perfect. The numbers might be the skeleton, but the story is the heart and soul. It's what gives us a much richer, deeper understanding of what progress actually feels like for the person going through it.
All right, so let's get practical for a minute. When it comes to the actual tools you use for measurement, there's a really big choice to make. Do you go with a standardized, off-the-shelf tool, or do you create one yourself?
On one hand, you've got your standardized tools. The big plus here is that they've been tested like crazy, so they're seen as really reliable and valid. But, and it's a big but, they've got some real downsides. They often focus on what's wrong, not what's right. They can have cultural biases, and sometimes they just don't quite fit a person's very specific, unique goals.
And that's exactly why there's another way. If that one-size-fits-all tool just isn't working, often the best thing to do is for the practitioner and the client to create their own tool, together. That way, you know for sure it's tailored to their situation, their words, and their definition of what success looks like.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that the best approach doesn't make you choose. It's about blending the two. It's combining the objective, black and white clarity of the numbers with the rich, subjective context of the story. That's how you get the full 360-degree picture of someone's journey.
Which leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If the data tells us what changed, but the story is what tells us why that change mattered, which one do you think is actually more important? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of all of this.